going to, as you can hear, the recording is now in progress. Welcome one and all. Thanks for coming along. This is a very important webinar tonight that unfortunately one that I'm sad to have to run, because I was hopeful that I wouldn't see Queensland Fruit Fly in my region, and I'm guessing the reason that you are online, if it's not in your region already, it's on its way. And unfortunately, instead of us just sitting back and thinking, oh, well, one day I might have to worry about it, we now all have to worry about it, because it's well and truly either in our regions or on its way very close. So I'm going to introduce an expert in the field. Bronwyn is her name, and she's from the agribusiness sector in Yarra Valley, and I'll let her do the honour of introducing herself, and I'll stay in the background. Look, the session will run for a little bit over an hour. We're going to hold questions at the end because it's a complex subject, and Bron will cover just about everything that you'll need to know in the session. So we'll leave the Q&A at the end. By all means, though, happily type away in the chat asking those questions so that we've at least got something to aim for when we get at the end. Bron, over to you.
Thanks very much, and welcome everybody. I too have a bit of a passion about Queensland fruit fly not being in Victoria. If anyone tells you they're a native insect, tell them where to go, because this is native to Queensland, and there's even debate about that. But I don't believe we're dealing with a native insect. It's certainly not welcome in Victoria or the Yarra Valley, and I'm pretty sure you guys don't want to welcome it either. So we'll kick off tonight with Queensland Fruit Fly ID. We will look at the life cycle. We will touch on addressing different parts of that life cycle, and we will develop an integrated pest management strategy. So when I talk about integrated pest management, I'll be talking about it as IPM. You may have heard that, or you may have heard IPDM, that's integrated pest and disease management, but I will figuratively be saying IPM. So I've been funded for the last couple of years to work in the Yarra Valley by Agriculture Victoria. We're here to support our very intensive horticulture industry. But by doing that help for that industry, we are in turn helping all of those community gardens and backyard producers of fruit as well. So anyone that produces fruit can be affected by this pest. So we're going to start off with IDing our pests so that we can start building the correct management plan. As I said before, it is considered a native insect. It has migrated its way south from Queensland. The adult's about 7 or 8 mil long. Has a brown-red main body colour with yellow markings. So some people refer to this as Hawthorn Football Club colours, if any of you are football fans. The wings are relatively clear, as opposed to some other pests and insects that we deal with, which have different patterns on their wings. This is a clear wing, and it is one of Australia's economic pests of concern. The other one's Mediterranean fruit fly. So where can fruit fly live? Well, it can live anywhere where there is warmth and humidity and a place to breed. So in Melbourne, we expect there to be 3 to 6 generations successfully being able to go through each season. So it is present in the Northern Territory, Queensland, New South and Victoria. And we have protocols and biosecurity measures in place so that Queensland fruit fly cannot get to South Australia, Western Australia and Tasmania. You may have heard these states in the news talking about a Queensland fruit fly incursion. That means that the fruit fly has managed to travel over to that state, and their state governments are doing their best to eradicate the pest. They do this in various ways, and the residential gardener or the commercial fruit grower really has no say in what happens at all. The fruit fly pest is eradicated or controlled.
The contract will get traded.
If we could get some muting of microphones, that would be great. Thank you. Now, in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and Northern Territory, it is the landowner's responsibility to manage their pest. So knowing what your pest looks like, you can get further information from these websites. You can go to our Fruit Fly Yarra Valley website. You can go to a website by the, it's like a national website. It's called Fruit Fly Identification. And that's just like working out your plants. You can go through step by step, pointing out the features that you've noticed, and you should arrive, if it's successfully identified, at Queensland Fruit Fly. Agriculture Victoria is a reliable source of information, and the other departments of agriculture you can look for as well. So here we have on the screen a Queensland Fruit Fly. Most notable are the yellow shoulder pads. The two yellow lines, I call them GT stripes, and the yellow triangle just on the lower part of the back there. Those key yellow markings are what will help you identify Queensland fruit fly. The larvae, on the other hand, I like to say it's carrot-shaped. This is the tail end here, the wider end with we call it a round blunt end. The head end is the pointy end, and it's got a tiny little black dot. That dot is actually a jaw mandible. So you'll find that the head is narrow, the tail is wide, the colour is a creamy white, almost transparent colour. You can see the internal workings of the larvae, and sometimes that colour can change depending on what fruit it is consuming. So we're going to start with the life cycle now. So let's pick a spot. The fruit fly eggs are laid into the fruit. It's the female fruit fly who uses her ovipositor or her egg-laying tube to put the eggs into the fruit. Inside of that fruit, the larvae grow. The fruit starts to rot, and the larvae start to chew that rotten fruit. It's like a soup. They can suck it up through their little black jaw mandible. The fruit will fall to the ground because of the rot. It thinks it's ripe. The larvae crawl out of this ripe, rotting fruit. They put a hard case around themselves, and inside here they pupate. So that means that they spend a period of time in this secure environment where they change from a larvae to a fly. A short time later, they crack out of this pupa case. They crawl through tunnels in the soil or in the leaf litter or wherever it is that they've pupated, and they emerge and spend a few minutes, few hours drying out. They need to seek sugar, water, and protein, just as we do. They actually need to consume protein in order to mature to an adult fly in order to mate. Mating occurs, and the whole life cycle starts again when the female lays the eggs in the fruit. So what we're going to do tonight is use this life cycle, identify the weaknesses, identify where we have tools to impact this life cycle and disrupt the production of Queensland fruit fly. So the egg cycle, this is the pictures of the Queensland fruit fly female with her ovipositor injecting the eggs into the fruit. It really is as tiny as a pinprick. It's extremely hard to see. You often see or witness this damage well and truly after the event has occurred and other secondary infections setting in. So those eggs under that Granny Smith skin, I believe, are about 1 millimetre long. By the time we see it and actually know that something's wrong, there's rot and there's larvae crawling through the fruit. From the outside, mature sting marks or sting marks that have healed and the fruit has kept trying to mature really can be misidentified with other pest issues as well. I believe some of these have dimple bug marks as well as Queensland fruit fly stings. The fruit on the outside has healed, so it's stayed quite whole, but this particular apple here was sliced in half and you can see the degree of rot that has taken place. There's a fruit fly larvae right in the centre there. This one has also got a codling moth sting or codling moth injury. So we always have to consider when we're doing our pest identification inside of the fruit, is there a secondary pest? Is there a secondary infection? What occurred first? And therefore, how are we now going to deal with this? There's no point trying to treat for fruit fly if it was only island fly or codling moth. The treatment's just not going to work. So correct identification is essential. These are from the Yarra Valley, these plums. These are the plums that got hit by Queensland Fruit Fly that actually shut down our pest-free trade protocol from the Yarra Valley to those sensitive states I mentioned before. What we can see here, and the reason why I took this photograph, is you can see in the middle of the screen where the pointer is, I'm sorry if it's not big enough, but a very small pinprick of a sting mark and a little bit of secondary infection or rot starting. But you can also see quite a flat edge to the fruit. So it hasn't necessarily matured and expanded as you would a piece of fruit get bigger and rounder. You can see that the crop is generally unripe and green. But you can also see where the fruit fly sting has occurred, that the fruit is much riper, it's very accelerated, but we can also see here a larger dark hole. That's actually the exit hole. So the larvae has been in there, or the egg of the larvae has been in there for some time, probably around a week, I'd say, because it's been in there for enough time to mature and then exit the fruit. Now, this fruit hadn't even fallen to the ground. Some of this fruit, such as the piece of fruit in the background there, you could literally squeeze it and the larvae and the rot would pop out. So all of the damage had actually happened closer to the center of the fruit. To the left of your screen, these are some apples that have come from the Goulburn Valley. So the rot hasn't necessarily been thick and soupy like it is in a plum or a stone fruit. It's actually a bit drier and a bit more structured. And what we also notice is that Queensland fruit fly development is slightly slower in apples. So they're almost able to chew their way around the decomposing apple and create a little cavity inside of the fruit and stay there for a bit longer period of time. But as you can see from the outside, that is such a very minor mark. There's every chance that that particular marking may get through an inspection system by mistake or sneak through, and it could end up on your supermarket shelf. So knowing what you're looking for is a very, very tricky task, particularly in that commercial production zone. So these are the plums that I pictured earlier. I was able to work with them, and I'm just going to see if I can make this video play. 1 second. Have a look at the tip of my finger in this video and watch what this little larvae does. So what you were able to see in that video was the fruit fly larvae putting its head to its tail and creating a U-shaped stance, and then it would flick or jump or skip, and that's how it tries to escape danger. So that's another telltale sign that it's Queensland fruit fly. They do that in their third instar, so that's their most mature stage of being a larvae. It is one way that we can try and narrow it down to being Queensland fruit fly. Lemons are another one that I get asked. It's actually amazing how many people tell me that they don't have any fruit, they don't grow any fruit, but I ask them if they have a lemon tree, and then they go, oh yeah, I do. So lemons, particularly the Maya lemon or the sweeter varieties or thinner skinned varieties, thin-skinned sweet grapefruit as well, they can be hit by Queensland fruit fly. And Queensland fruit fly is a huge issue in the citrus growing industries in Northern Victoria and New South Wales as well. This particular lemon that was reported to me, it actually took the lady a few days to properly identify that there were larvae in the fruit. The larvae were actually easily confused with the segments of the lemon flesh. And it wasn't until that they got a little bit bigger and that they started to move did the Warburton resident actually have the confidence to call me and let me know that she definitely does have a fruit fly problem. You can see the secondary rot that occurs as this rot or this problem has advanced. And you can see the larvae in here as well. But also please note that we went and had this tested. 4 of these were Queensland fruit fly larvae. 18 of them were a pest but not a bad pest, called island fly. So that's an insect we do find a lot of in Victoria. It's often considered a pest of citrus, but it can't get in there on its own. Island fly could have only gotten in there from some other form of entry damage. So we always need to consider how many pests there are in our identification. So this is the Queensland fruit fly once it's landed on the ground, and I'm going to play this short video and you can watch how quickly this larvae is able to go and hide and escape from danger. So by now it's pretty much hidden. There's not very many animals or chickens or predators that will now knock this larvae about. And what it does is from that point there, it secures itself with this hard case around it, and that's that pupa case. This is about the size of a big grain of brown rice. So we know all the parts of the life cycle. Now we need to look at the host range. So it's easier for me to say it doesn't get into pineapples. Some interesting points here are all your standard supermarket fruit, but it will also get into lily pillies, which is not something we tend to eat a lot of, but we do grow a lot of. Guavas, dragon fruit, I don't think we grow up much down here, but I'm sure that some of the experts in this room probably will claim that they can, and I believe them because you're clever people. Tomatoes, capsicums, and chilies is another one that people don't associate as fruit because we typically call them vegetables. So basically, if it's got a skin that the fruit fly can penetrate with her ovipositor, if it's got sugar and carbohydrate and flesh, in which rot can set in, and those organisms that are living off those carbohydrates can then give the larvae some sustenance, it's a host. So when is Queensland fruit fly a risk? Well, I was told it's only going to be a risk in the warm weather. But what we're finding out is that we're getting more warm weather and these buggers are becoming more tolerant of the cold. So we also need to consider overwintering populations. Now, when I was a little wee tucker growing up on the orchard in the Yarra Valley, I asked my grandfather, what was the Queensland fruit fly? Because we'd just passed some signs on a recent camping trip up on the border. My grandfather said to me, you'll never need to worry about fruit fly. Don't worry, dear. And he proceeded not to tell me any further. And when I first got this job, I think my grandfather would have been rolling in his grave. But I went to some of the orchardists and I said, this is a problem. I need to talk to you about it. We need a strategy. We need to figure this out. And I got told where to go because this isn't going to be a problem. Well, we know for a fact that this fly can overwinter in Melbourne. It can probably overwinter in Werribee. And we are suspicious that it can overwinter in parts of the Yarra Valley. People tell me that frost will stop fruit fly from overwintering, but it's actually going to take 5 continuous frosty days of -3 degrees to really ruffle the feathers of these guys. And that information comes from my mentor, Andrew Jessup, who is a long-serving New South Wales DPI fruit fly expert. So we know that it can survive in places like Broken Hill, Cobram, Mildura, and we also know that they get severe frosts as well. So what we need to consider is what are the overwintering conditions that are going to extend the death rate of the females in particular that like to overwinter. And I believe it's actually the length and the duration of our cold weather, and then the number of days where it's warm enough inside of that period for that fly to go out and get sustenance. So that might be microbes, it might be rotting fruit, anything that it can feed off as an adult. The condition of the fly adult as it heads into winter is also another factor. And also the number of sheltered, perfect places for them to hide and hibernate. So just like if we were lost out in the bush, we'd try and get out of the wind, try and get out of the cold, try and not use much energy on the coldest of times. That's how the Queensland fruit fly will survive as an adult over winter. They tend not to survive as larvae or as pupae over the winter. And then I started looking at what we produce in the Yarra Valley, and I don't reckon Werribee is probably any different. So around our southern areas, so Melbourne and peri-urban Melbourne, we produce fruit ripe for the picking 10 or more months of the year. So what fruit fly does is it just goes from one crop to the next crop to the next crop to the next crop. So that's how it gets through the entire year. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. So the risks are particularly roadside. Blackberries growing on fences, cherry plums, prickly pear. They tend to be the three most popular places in the Yarra Valley where fruit fly is not managed. I would add to that roadside apples or pears even. I would add to that street trees, particularly all the ornamental pear species, all the crabapple species. It might not be hugely prevalent or hugely successful, but I'm sure the Queensland fruit fly will find her way in. And quite often those particular street trees and roadside weeds aren't managed, aren't harvested. Large areas of fruit is another consideration. So commercial fruit growers, I have to put my hand up. I've come from a long line of commercial fruit growers. They will be doing their best to manage fruit fly, to manage the efficiency of their system. But fruit fly can get in, fruit fly will get in, and fruit fly does get in. So if there is one slight hiccup in a large production scale, then that problem, that fruit fly problem it just goes from 0 to 100 inside of a few days. It could be that they're using a chemical spray to control fruit fly in various different forms. We'll get to that later. But if that rains and that fruit fly is able to take an opportunity of there being an absence of pesticide and the fruit is primed and ready for harvest, well, that's the ideal time for the fruit fly to lay her eggs. So yes, big system, big controls, but also potential for big mistakes. And then there comes to that trade and transport. It's not very economically viable if you have to not send a semi-trailer worth of fruit from one side of the state to the other side of the state and not sell the fruit. So we are at risk of fruit growers pushing and selling fruit fly ridden fruit without knowing it, and they would have to be a very, very severe infestation or concern or a very obvious visual for them not to send that fruit. So we need to acknowledge that this risk can happen, and that's how we need to deal with it as the public. We need to acknowledge that that risk is out there, and that as consumers, if we buy a piece of fruit with fruit fly or suspect fruit fly inside of it, we need to take it back to that place of production, and we need to make sure that that chain is followed back to where that producer is, because that producer should never have sent that fruit. This can also be seen in domestic markets and farmers markets. Most farmers markets, the producers don't necessarily have the infrared vision of being able to see inside of the piece of fruit like some of the big producers do. All of that internal stuff is scanned at that bigger scale of production. And we often find that farmers markets are the least inspected by the biosecurity officers. So you're probably more likely to pick up fruit fly in fruit at a farmer's market than you are, say, the Melbourne wholesale markets. The biggest risk actually is people, you and I, unknowingly taking fruit from one region to another. Let's go for a picnic. Oh, my fruit's got bugs in it. I'm going to throw it out the window. That piece of fruit, that larvae has just been spread to a new region. Another classic is when you share your homegrown goods unknowingly, full of fruit fly larvae, and the recipient gets to see them and goes, oh, that's disgusting. I'm not going to eat that. And they'll put it in their compost bin. Worst possible place they can put it, because they've now got fruit fly to deal with year in and year out after that. So all of these risks assessed, we know that the greatest risk of fruit fly being moving from one region to another is actually the unaware and uneducated home gardeners. They do the most amount of movement of fruit and the least amount of control, and they often have the least amount of knowledge. So my job, particularly tonight, and I hope to keep in touch with you via any future programs that we're able to run, is to help you be informed, be aware, and be knowledgeable so that you know how to act and prevent this from happening to your fruit and preventing the spread of fruit fly. So this is what fruit fly production looks like. It is absolutely horrid. I've come home one night after dealing with endless seeing of larvae inside of fruit, and I'd missed dinner, I was exhausted, and all I wanted was to have a bit of Vegemite on toast. So there I am, half awake, midnight. I've put my toast in the toaster, I've grabbed some butter, put that on my toast, undid the Vegemite lid, and before I was able to even look inside properly, I scared myself because I thought I could see larvae inside of a Vegemite jar. It turned out it was just a bit of butter that one of the kids had left in there, but it actually builds and plays in your mind. It is the most horrid experience to see fruit, beautiful fruit, absolutely ruined and rotting from the inside out. The interesting photo on this screen is actually the nectarine. This is taken from some of my colleagues in Fruit Fly Murray Valley up in Mildura. This nectarine is so green that the fruit fly have had several attempted stings at laying eggs. They've successfully pierced the skin. Not quite sure whether they've successfully laid eggs or not, but the nectarine has actually had a sap flow response. So that sap leaking out of that nectarine is as a result of repeated fruit fly damage. So what are we going to do? We can take some steps to protect our fruit. So physical barriers such as netting, but we can also have signage to stop people bringing fruit into our fruit fly free zones. This could be your farm, this could be your town, this could be your state. Wherever you set your zone, it's a good idea to have signage up and let people know that you don't want their problems. We can remove the risk. So by keeping a clean and hygienic space, raking up fruit, destroying it, reducing the size of trees. I have been on a wait list to have Craig come out to the Yarra Valley and teach us how to do some fantastic fruit tree pruning. I'm sure you guys have had the benefit of Craig's expertise, but that is the number one thing you can do, is plan and prune your fruit producing trees and plants to be able to be managed well. So if we do get fruit fly, we need to be intensively trapping and inspecting the fruit. So you don't just look in traps, you always look in the fruit. You need to alert others and let them know that you have a problem. Many people think that they've got leprosy as soon as they've got fruit fly. Please don't think you've got that. It's not your fault. It's happened. It's going to happen to one of us one day. The best thing we can do is let others know that you've been hit so that they are then inspired to go and have a look and we can minimize the spread. Over time, it's probably important to identify the source of the spread. So there is a town in northern Victoria that had fruit fly year after year after year, and they eventually figured out it was a rogue loquat tree that had made itself home in the main street of this particular town. No one was looking after it. It was fruiting in October, and the fruit fly had then the audacity to infect everyone else's trees. So they took about 3 years to figure that out. So it is really about identifying the source of where that spread is coming from. By the time they took that loquat tree out of the main street, fruit fly numbers instantly were reduced every season after that. You definitely need to increase your monitoring intensity. If you don't have fruit fly, it might be okay to have 1 or 2 or even 3 fruit fly traps. But if you do have fruit fly, I'd be looking about a male trap every 400 meters. So that is making like that grid pattern. For most of us who've got suburban backyards or even small backyards, that means for us to know what's going on with fruit fly, we need our neighbours involved. So that trapping intensity really does need to be including everyone. If fruit fly is present and hanging around or starting to build up in numbers, we can use a fruit fly bait. I'll explain what this involved in the bait process later. or we might choose to use an insect mesh, so some netting. Some people have even got to the point where they'd like to improve their hygiene and their sanitation, so they've actually removed the problem tree altogether. They may have halved the size of that tree, or instead of letting the fruit fall on the ground, they may have chosen to harvest the fruit before it's fallen and dispose of it if it's not needed. What I do urge caution on is if there's any consideration that you're going to use a cover spray, please be acknowledged that those cover sprays are damaging to the beneficial insects in your garden. There are rules and protocols about how much of these chemicals you can use, when you can put them on your plant and the fruit. And you may get to the point where it is just not economical to ever put the broad spectrum spray out. However, it might also be the other way around, and that putting the broad spectrum spray might be a necessary action that you take in order to protect your crop. But please be very considerate if you ever go down the cover spray pathway. If you have infested fruit, the best thing you can do is boil it or freeze it. Some people solarize it. So by boiling, I mean putting it in a pan or a microwave and bringing the whole of the fruit to the boil. That kills the larvae and the eggs inside. If you freeze it, I don't mean just a bit of time in the freezer. I mean that it has to be in there until it's frozen solid. Some people choose to solarize, and this is only going to be effective if you can put it in a black bag and keep it in the sun and get it to a really hot temperature for, I would say, a couple of days, because you've got the hot of the day and the cool of the night, so it has to be in this sealed environment for longer. We have to have hot enough days. It is a technique that I think was developed in Northern Victoria, Mildura and above, so they do have hotter, more intense sun. I would dare say we may not get enough heat and enough intensity across these days to actually make this hugely effective in Southern Victoria. The other thing with bags, and I'd say is more of a Southern Victoria or urban problem, is that we could get foxes or rats or other things quite easily gnawing their way through into that bag. So you could be halfway through a solarizing process and the fruit flies are allowed to escape. So I would also treat solarizing with caution. I would also like for people to report fruit fly. Even if you don't have a funded program, figure out how to share this information so as many people know about your demise as possible. So you may have a regional coordinator, you may be able to talk to a nursery or a fruit tree expert in your area. Try and share your information with a community group or a community garden. Definitely tell your neighbours. Council probably don't want you to tell them, but I would encourage you to reach out to your council so that they are at least aware of the increasing problem that Queensland Fruit Fly is going to be. The Yarra Ranges Council has kindly put some information on their webpage for the Yarra Ranges, and I know Nillumbik have done a fantastic job of putting up some fruit fly information just to help people know where to go to find out more accurate information on how to manage fruit fly. And you also need to tell your place of purchase. So if you've bought some nectarines or some apples and they look like they're infested, please take them back. Tell them the date that you bought them and allow that retailer to follow up where they've found that fruit from. The worst thing you can do is put the fruit that's infested into your compost bin. So inside of that compost bin, you're going to have a protected environment away from pests. You're going to have an ideal temperature and humidity for those fruit fly to finish their larval stage, go through that pupation phase, emerge as adults, you take the lid off and they escape. One of the trap suppliers I've become good friends with over the years, he tells the story of someone he worked with in Seymour, and this particular lady in Seymour, she was miles from anywhere because she lived on a broadacre farm. She knowingly but accidentally put some infested fruit in her compost bin. And despite only having a short fruiting period of plants in her garden, she has fruit fly every year. And there's no way they could come from other places. It is her bringing the infested fruit to her place and not treating it by boiling or freezing before she put it in the compost. So, now that you've got fruit fly, you need some traps. There are loads of traps on the market, and they'll all tell you that they're all brilliant and they all are pretty good. One thing we need to know about traps is that fruit flies hate going into traps. So what we're going to catch with whatever trap we use is always going to be just a percentage of the population of fruit flies that are out there. It is suggested that the government issue male fruit fly trap, so that's the one that attracts the male fruit flies, catches about 10% of what's out there. So one fly in there could mean that there is about 10 male flies in your garden, in your area. This means that the problem is likely more severe than what your traps will tell you. But we don't have anything better on the market. Now that we know that statistic, we know that really we should be acting at a one fly catch. So the types of traps that are out there are male traps. So they attract the Queensland fruit fly male. They can attract the male from about 200 metres away. So that's about why we put them on that 400 metre grid if possible. There are protein-based traps. Now, these attract based on a scent of the actual food. So the fruit flies can smell food, being the protein, but they can probably only smell it from anywhere between 10 to 20 metres away, just depending on the conditions. The hungriest of all the fruit flies are the virgin females. They are the ones that are going to be producing a lot of eggs in their lifetime, so they need the protein. And just like my teenage kids, they're always hungry for protein. A teenage fly, so to speak, is a fly that's newly emerged from the ground, and they need that protein in order to sexually mature to then breed. So we know that there's two parts of that life cycle where we could use protein as an attractant. The other part of the life cycle we're going to consider is the fruit-scented traps. So these often have a bright colour. They often have a round shape, so they're quite large to distinguish themselves from leaves. And again, they have a limited range of effectiveness because those cues are essentially fruit-based. Now, this is very effective for catching pregnant female flies, the ones that are actually looking for fruit to lay their eggs in. All of these traps usually have a kill method. So it could be chemical. So there's a chemical put in there. It's usually impregnated into some kind of fabric so that it has some kind of malleable product so that that is able to stay there and be effective for a long period of time. Some traps have a sticky card or a sticky surface in which the fly has gone in and then it'll stick and die. And so that some other trap designs involve the fruit fly that's entered drowning in liquid. I do have a trap info page on my website. I've also provided that to Craig so he can put that up on his website or share with his members as he sees fit. But essentially you could buy a male trap, a female bias trap, and it could have any of the chemical, sticky or drowning kill mechanisms, just depending on which brand, whether you want to be organic, whether you need to have be considerate of children and animals in your yard, or depending on what time of year you're trying to do your trapping. I would thoroughly recommend that you have at least one male trap to start with, and preferably 2, 3 or 4 of any of the protein or fruit-scented traps. The reason why I recommend you have at least 1 or 2 of the male traps is because they can catch the male fruit flies potentially in different conditions to what you'd be catching the female flies in. You really do need to know what your whole population of fruit flies is doing at any given time so that your treatments that you choose to apply are appropriate. So we'll just try and look at how we're going to use these both as a monitoring tool, but also potentially look at them as a mating disruption. So if it's just 1 or 2 traps, we call that monitoring. So we know that if we catch a fly in any given week, that we have an increasing problem. If we catch 10 flies, we have a drastically increasing problem. Sometimes if we don't catch any flies, we know that we could have improved our controls and our measures, so what we're doing is working. Or the other consideration we have to make is that there might be something wrong with the fruit fly trap. Something may have stolen those flies out of there. Or there could have been bad weather and the flies just aren't flying past. But as a general rule, we can use male fruit fly traps with the parapheromone in there that attracts the males. We can use that as a monitoring tool. This is most effective when these flies are sexually maturing. So when the fly comes out of the ground, he needs to spend a bit of time consuming those sugars and proteins, and then he's mature. But first of all, he has to come and get some of this parapheromone called Q lure, and that's what we put in the trap. He can also source that in the wild, but if there's some available in the trap and it's pretty easy for him to go to, that's where he'll go and get it from. Now he's going to get some more Q lure because that's what he thinks he needs to make himself attractive to the females. The more Q lure he can consume in his teenage sexually developing period of his life, the more attractive he will be to the ladies for breeding later on. So we take full advantage of his need for sex. If there is enough male attracting lures placed in a region, it's called mating disruption because the intent is to take out most of the males. Now, this is not very often used in an urban or a backyard situation. It's mainly used over acres and acres and acres of orchard or groves of fruit, and it's usually done in consolidation with a neighbourhood program. So it does need a very wide area and some accurately timed male annihilation tools to be applied. So most of the time we are just using the fruit fly traps that attract the males for monitoring. They don't necessarily remove the fruit fly threat. They just inform us of what we might need to do next. The other type of traps are the female biased traps. They're sometimes known as protein traps or fruit-centered traps. Again, they are most effective before the fruit is hit. So the protein is for that young female who's very protein dependent to create all of her eggs. And the other time that the fruit-centered trap is attractive is actually before the real fruit on the real tree is starting to size and shape and ripen. Because I'm sure most of you here in this room tonight would prefer the real thing over a fake, artificially scented piece of plastic that's hanging in the tree. So we need to make sure that these traps are out and operational well and truly before our crop starts. Let's note that the organic options for the female or the protein traps are the Sarah trap and Biotrap. So we have females heading for the protein or the fruit, and we have males heading for the male lure or male attracting lure. So we have a really good grip of what's going on between when the fly emerges out of the ground to that stage just before it hits the tree or hits the fruit. The baiting is another tool that we have. So it's a protein liquid. It's usually got an insecticide in it. The organic option is spinosad. You mix this with water and you apply it through a nozzle that allows you to use a jet stream. So you are actually creating droplets of this sticky gooey liquid on the leaf. And the stickier and gooier and wetter that this particular droplet stays, the more active the insecticide will be when the fruit fly is attracted to this food and then consumes the active ingredient such as spinosad. You really do need to start a baiting program 3 to 4 weeks before harvest, if not earlier. Some people start as early as 6 to 8 weeks before harvest, just depending on temperature and what else is around in your region. So if I've had lemons or if I've got locusts still being harvested in October, I'd start baiting my peach trees well and truly in December so that I've got fruit or at least nectarines and peaches that are not under a great deal of fruit fly pressure in February. Most people think they've harvested their fruit and they can stop, but fruit fly baiting is actually a weekly or sometimes more frequent program than a weekly program. You have to put fruit fly bait out after it's rained, not before, because the rain will just wash it off, and refrain from putting only overhead irrigation over the baited area. A bit like that mating disruption technique, fruit fly baiting is best done area wide. So if you've got a standard backyard that's 10 meters by 10 meters, you could put all the bait in the world out. There's still going to be some fruit flies coming from your neighbour's place. Once she's pregnant and she's full of eggs and she's ready to go, she's not interested in the bait at all. All she wants to do is find that right bit of fruit. So baiting has to be done on a program, a weekly program, and baiting has to be done area-wide in conjunction with, I would say, a township as opposed to a few neighbours here and there. So back to our life cycle again. We know that the most effective time for her to bait is before she is able to lay eggs and sting the fruit. So we've got baiting and fruit fly trapping currently in this IPM management. Next, we have hygiene. So that's the freezing, the boiling, or the plastic bagging and solarizing or binning. We have the mulching and the removal of the risk. We also have some very clever pruning techniques to keep the fruit trees manageable and easily picked. So by the time we have fruit fly baiting, fruit fly trapping, and hygiene in place, and mind you, this diagram doesn't cover the cover spray options, we actually have quite a very well integrated, very low chemical use, but unfortunately a bit higher in labour IPM program for managing Queensland fruit fly. But this is the program that's going to be the least disruptive of beneficial insects in your production system. There are some organic options that we can now bring into the mix as well. So consider the trap that you want. Some have chemicals and some don't have chemicals. Some rules with organic production mean that the fruit fly trap contents can't touch the produce, and some specify that they can't be in a registered packing area. So please double check your standards that you're growing to if you're an organic producer. Hygiene's definitely the number one strategy because you have the greatest amount of control over where that infested bit of fruit goes. Baiting, for organic options, you have to check the carrier. So whilst the fruit fly, what it's attracted to, the food particular part of that bait, it might be organic, but please check the carrier that the fruit fly food is sitting in for the bait, and also check the carrier that your registered chemical has. So one version of a chemical might be organic, but another version of the same chemical might not be organic because of the carrier. Note that the only organic option for bait comes already pre-mixed. You can't add the active to that or another active to that. It already has the active in it. So check, make sure that it meets your organic production criteria. With sprays, some people would like to use an organic spray. Keep in mind that the only organic spray that I know of that's registered for Queensland fruit fly is a broad spectrum insecticide, and it will kill the good bugs as well. So be careful of that damage to non-target insects. You can incorporate chooks or ducks, but chooks are particularly clever at finding fruit fly because of the shape of their beak and their tendency to scratch around and find that pupae. Be careful with the process of shifting waste fruit to animals. Make sure you don't accidentally infest a new area. One strategy is to early harvest your fruit. I actually don't like this. My personal favourite way of eating fruit is actually as ripe as it can be on the tree. I do believe it has more flavour, but it is a strategy that you could employ. You could go and pick them all before they're infested, bring them all in and take them out of harm's way. There's some exciting work in entomopathogenic fungi and nematodes. So these are organisms in the ground that can attack the larvae or the emerging fly. Not yet proven or released fruit fly, but definitely in a very constructive research phase. There are some varieties that you could apply a kaolin-based spray to. So essentially this covers the fruit in a disguise, and the fruit fly can't distinguish where that fruit is, and it may even mask the smell. People aren't quite sure exactly how it works. This is variety dependent though. It can't be used on, for example, berry bosc pears, or they won't rust it up. I wouldn't use a kaolin spray on a fluffy peach because I do believe that that's going to impact the quality of the fruit. So it is variety dependent. I've been told that the diatomaceous earth is an option, but my concern is that if the diatomaceous earth is wet, it doesn't behave in the way that it needs to kill the insect. So I would use it as part of a different or bigger system. Penny Woodward has a great book, and she's mentioned lots of different repellents. Have a look for basil, citronella, garlic, parsnips, turnips, pyrethrum, southernwood, and tansy. I haven't proven these, but it's no harm to go and find and test these out. And the other most exciting technology on the horizon is sterile insect technology. It is very expensive. It's what they use in South Australia. There's been a lot of horticulture money and government money go into developing sterile insect technology for fruit flying in Australia. The essence of that is that in a factory in South Australia, they breed fruit flies. Now, what they do is they sterilize these fruit flies with irradiation. They chill them, they put them in an aeroplane, and they fly the aeroplane over a problem fruit fly area. Let's pick the Yarra Valley. It hasn't happened in the Yarra Valley yet, but it might one day. And the aim is to release all of these sterilized flies. Now, if they release them at a ratio that far outnumbers the wild flies that are fertile, the idea is that these fertile wild flies will unsuccessfully mate with the sterile fruit flies and not be in a position to expand the fruit fly population, and therefore population will eventually crash over time. This concept is still at a government stage. I believe anyone can go and buy the sterile flies if they wish to have a program. However, the amount of sterile flies that are currently in production is only enough for South Australia. So it's definitely a watch this space. Having said all of this, the most important thing is that we consider that this is area-wide management, and whatever we do has to be done in a coordinated way with our neighbours and their neighbours and their neighbours. And we also need to be doing this as part of a toolbox approach, so using all of those tools we've just gone through tonight. Netting seems to be the obvious chemical-free, least disruptive way of dealing with fruit fly. And it's not really dealing with fruit fly as much as it's preventing fruit fly from becoming your problem. Now, your net you need to use is definitely a 2mm by 2mm hole or smaller. It is called insect mesh. My tips is to make the netting easy. I like to use star pickets and poly pipes and slide my netting over. And I like to create entry and exit because I cannot stand netting getting caught on my hair, on my hat, on my buttons and my jeans pockets and whatever else it decides to get attached to. Fruit fly netting needs to be sealed at the bottom. So this can be done by sealing it to the ground, so long as the ground underneath is clear of fruit fly eggs and larvae and all the rest of it. Sorry, the pupae and larvae and all the rest of it. Or it might be done by tying the netting securely to the base of the tree. Again, making sure there's no fruit fly within the tree area first. I personally don't like the photograph of the fruit fly netting over the tree there. I think that's too disruptive to the airflow and the growth area of that tree. So I do like to see netting over a structure with the plants well pruned and maintained inside. I think this is ideal for ease of management, prevention of secondary problems that occur when you make a confined humid space like this with fruit fly netting. Keep in mind that the initial expense of setting up netting is something to consider, but any tears or rips can be repaired. Make sure you buy UV stabilized product. The timing of the netting has to go on after pollination because you don't want to prevent the bees from getting there and doing their work. But I cannot stress enough how important it is to do the tree pruning and the training of the trees so that they are in this managed situation. So this does require a fair bit of forethought and planning. So if you spend any time doing anything after this presentation, please go out and rethink your garden or plan your garden that you're about to plant really well so that it can be netted and you're not netting something that needs protecting at the same time as preventing something else from accidentally not being pollinated. So you do need to have your annual cycle in your mind. These are some examples of how they grow fruit in Mildura, and it is the only way to grow fruit in Mildura. Nobody can produce fruit without a net. It's pretty sad. I feel like I'm growing marshmallow trees. So in summary, traps are mainly used for surveillance. There are male traps, protein traps, and fruit-scented traps. They need to go in a tree, preferably about 1.5 meters high, inside of some foliage, but outside of the direct sun. No one likes getting into a fruit fly trap that's hot, a bit like getting into the car after you've been at the shops and you've left the car in the hot car park. You need to check your traps. I do have stories of farmers putting fruit fly traps in and thinking that they're protected, only to be finding out about 2 months later that they have a massive fruit fly problem. So go and make sure you put your fruit fly trap somewhere where you're going to check it. You definitely need to have your fruit fly traps out and applied before that first generation of fruit fly starts to be active in the spring. So we make sure in the Yarra Valley we have our fruit fly traps out on September 1. Apply the fruit fly bait before the problem in your area. Fruit fly baiting with this targeted approach actually is most effective at low fruit fly populations. It's applied as droplets. It's not a mist. It does not go everywhere. It's just droplets in key areas. It does need to be repeated and reapplied, and you do need to keep it going post-harvest. Hygiene. The idea is to prevent the fruit from falling. Once you've picked that fruit, you are then in control. You can choose whether that fruit is processed, eaten, given away, but if it is infested, you do need to destroy what has been infested. Do this by boiling or freezing. I would try where I could to prevent entry onto the property. If, for example, I was to buy a bag of peaches from a farmer's market, the first thing I would do would be take that straight to my kitchen and process it in the biosecurity area where I have a disposal method at my leisure and I have containment. You can also remove unmanaged host plants. So if you know that you can't look after your whole backyard, I would definitely prioritise what you want to keep, manage that well, and remove the rest. They're only going to attract fruit fly if you can't manage it. Cover sprays are useful for large fruit fly infestations. However, they are toxic to good bugs. The spray that we have often doesn't reach the larvae on the inside, so their timing is absolutely essential. MRLs are maximum residue limits, so be very careful that any spray that you use doesn't breach that. And be careful about withholding periods, that's WHPs, about when you can safely enter the crop. All of that information is on the fruit fly spray label, of which you will probably find it very hard to get in a Southern Victorian nursery, retail nursery. It's just something that we don't stock very much of, so I don't consider it really the best option at all. Netting is probably where we will end up. It does, I believe, require a structure. It is an expensive startup, but it's probably worth it over its lifespan. It's chemical free. You can move it from tree to tree to tree as they are increasing or getting closer to harvest. You do need to time it and not let it disrupt your pollination. It does keep other pests out as well, so it does have an added advantage. And I believe that out of all of these, this is probably the most available and achievable and the most successful. So with area-wide management, we need to all be participating in protecting this. So this is a photo of the farm that I grew up on as a kid, and we were surrounded by another orchard, and I spent most of my holidays at like my university holidays putting out codling moth pheromones. And I put out codling moth pheromones in this little patch here. We still got codling moth from the neighbouring orchard. So the effort and expense putting out those codling moth pheromones was very, very short-lived. And unfortunately, we couldn't necessarily keep on going with that strategy until we got the neighbour involved as well. So it is very essential to get everyone involved for good area-wide management. So whatever we do, we have to synchronise our efforts to control fruit fly. So being on good terms with your neighbour is the best thing you can do to try and work out a plan for fruit fly. We do need to act both on commercial and residential properties, as well as those properties that are managed by council or government, or even businesses that have ornamental trees as decoration, and they don't necessarily understand that what they're doing is hosting fruit fly. Lily pillies and lemons are the two, or even mandarins are the two or three classic problems here. All of you tonight, I believe, are going to be well equipped to be able to take away a plan, or at least take away elements to start making your plan. So your plan might be what you're doing on your place. Your plan might be what you're doing in your place of work, or your plan might be more of a community-minded plan of what you want to do. So all those resources are there on the Fruit Fly Yarra Valley website. They're there on the Agriculture Victoria website, and I'm sure Craig's going to have some resources available for you as well. If you'd like to check out the area-wide management video on YouTube, it's a very good explanation of how important it is to all act together. And you can also see a video on sterile fruit flies too. We won't play these, but there's some more resources. I'll just leave them up here for long enough so that you can capture those particular YouTube addresses. Some of these are for managing fruit fly from a commercial point of view, and others are just a snip clip on what fruit fly is, and you might be able to share that with your colleagues if you're after a quick fix. Sorry, I just have to flick through these. So this is my mum and dad. They're definitely firm believers of pest freedom that we've had in the Yarra Valley. They would like to keep that. This cost curve is just a quick explanation that the cost of doing nothing is actually going to be higher than the investment we need to put in to prevent this pest. So I do believe we should be putting the effort into preventing this from becoming a bigger problem, because it's only going to be more expensive later. So you might be able to help by working with your community. You might be able to help just by hanging some traps and sharing the news by door knocking. Definitely go and have a look at the toolkit that's available to you via the website, and I'm just going to link to the resources now. If you head over to www.fruitflyv.com.au, you can register to do the fruit fly training, which is about a 25-minute version of what you've just sat through tonight, but it's also a tool that you can go and tap into so that you can share this further with your communities. So after that, I'm just going to mention that we've got resources for schools, kids in schools, about making fruit fly traps and understanding biosecurity and trade. A map of our fruit fly surveillance system that we've actually just pulled in now because our funding's closed. But that's the kind of extensive trapping network you need to really get on top of fruit fly in an area. Our program's actually done lots of Facebook, lots of working with groups, lots of presentations in the flesh and online, newspaper articles and signage. That all helps if there are ideas that you'd like to pick for your area that you're working in. I do believe early detection and early response is the way to go. So the quicker you can pick this up, the smaller the problem is. And it often means less losses and less chemicals. So this is just a seed to plant. Have a think about how you as a community might tackle this. Have a think about how you're going to tackle it in an urban or a rural setting. And really give it a go and try and see if you can solve the problem before it gets to you. So that's it for me. They're my acknowledgements, and I'm happy to take questions. And I've come in under the hour and a quarter I said I'd be, Craig.
Thank you very much, Bron. And wow, what a lot of information to go through. That was awesome. It really was. It's going to be an incredible, difficult journey to navigate for all of us. Unfortunately, I wish it was a tad easier, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Early detection is certainly the key to success in this. And for those that are involved in the orchard, already, keeping trees at a manageable height, and that means about 2 metres. They should not be any higher than that. High as you can reach standing flat-footed. And if you're a bit vertically challenged, then if you're the person pruning the tree and you can't reach 2 metres, we'll bring it down to where you can. It's vitally important. You want to be able to make sure that you can easily net your trees. And I agree with you. Just putting a net over the top and tying it with the base is not the answer. You really need a stretched frame so that they can be pinned at the bottom, at the ground, with an entry point or exit, for that matter, at either end. Look, seriously, I think that's going to be the way forward. And I'm a bit with you also, Bron, with the sprays. I don't see that is really a solution. It's never worked anywhere else, and I can't see how it's going to work here either. We need to be diligent and be out there baking early, September 1. And, in terms of netting, make sure your nets are on by Christmas Eve. You may need to consider cherries maybe a little bit earlier, but do they get into cherries too, do they, Bron?
They do.
Yep. So cherries.
Christmas Eve is another factor that is a good point to mention. We've not caught fruit fly in the Yarra Valley before Christmas.
Yeah. So
that doesn't mean it's not there.
No, granted.
It's just we've not caught it. So Christmas
Yeah.
Eve, if you've got other fruits, cherries a bit earlier, but you might get through with what's called a cold winter window. So not enough fruit fly to warrant making an action. You might just have 1s and 2s lying around. They may not affect your crop before Christmas.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I mean, depending upon where you are in your regions, we get a lot of frost here, but I'm low-lying. I'm only 100 metres from the river. Other parts, just not far from me, don't get as much frost as I get. So, and I hope, touch wood, I haven't had any fruit fly here yet, but we certainly have had it. A couple of instances of it down in Werribee Park Heritage Orchard. So it's on the march. And I know that it's in pockets of Geelong and elsewhere. So, we really do need to be diligent. I mean, this is a management scenario. You are not going to be able to eradicate this. No one else has been able to do it. So, this really is something it's up to each and every one of us, and it needs to be a coordinated attempt at this. You can't just do it on your own. As Bron says, you've got to involve others, particularly your neighbours. If they're growing fruit trees and so forth, make them aware of it. Blame us. Say, hey, I've just done this wonderful workshop and they've made us aware of this, and this is what we need to look at doing on these dates, and perhaps when you go out and get your traps, perhaps ask if they'd like to come along with you, so they're the sorts of things that we can do, as a community. And if you're involved in community groups, then please spread the word. It's vitally important. What I'll do is I'll endeavour to post the literature that Bron has made available to me tonight, somewhere either on my website, or I might even put some links on the YouTube video of this, and the recording of this will go on the YouTube, on my YouTube channel, so that it's there for everyone, all and sundry, to go back and revisit. It's a great presentation. We need it there to be, to be utilised. So please refer others to it when it goes up. So
a good news story, Craig. You talk about neighbours, and I can't emphasise that enough. I've got a group of 6 neighbours, large and small land lots in Yellingbo Seville area. They had fruit fly originally. They've worked together and not had fruit fly since for 5 years now, despite fruit fly increasing in other parts of the Yarra Valley. It can be done if your neighbours are involved and you act early.
Yeah. And what size blocks were they on, Bron?
There's a mix. So there's some residential blocks in there. There's some large acreage, strawberries, cherries, apples, and some bush in there as well. So six people over, I would say half a suburb, or less than half a suburb.
I mean,
so It's a gully in the Yarra Valley that is 3 minutes from my workplace.
Yeah.
That it's 3 minutes in the other direction, they've got increasing fruit fly problems.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you the effectiveness of working together as neighbours and all doing your bit.
Well, it goes without saying. I mean, it's got to be a team effort, So, and that's very encouraging. I've got to say that's great news if that's the case. I mean, fantastic. So, as I say, it's up to each and every one of us to do our little bit. It's not just a case of please do not, under any circumstance, bin it. It really does need to be knocked on the head, so that it's a bit like citrus gall wasp. People cutting it off and sending it to landfill. It still hatches, and it becomes someone else's problem. We've really got to be more responsible. This is
The thing with that, Craig, too, is that like fruit fly, you need the whole toolkit. You
yeah,
just prune your citrus gall wasp infected parts out, you create this flush of growth.
Yep.
And it's the one that gets infected. You have
Yep.
to do all the steps and you have to use
Yep.
all the tools in the toolbox
Yep.
to be effective at what you do, let alone what your neighbours do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to teach them to do the same thing. Otherwise, you've got no chance, because you'll get rid of yours and theirs will infect yours, as Bron rightly pointed out tonight. So, even with codling moth, same deal. So these pest insects, unfortunately, when it comes to our food system, threaten our very existence. I mean, I rely heavily on what we grow. I mean, we produce 85% of our fruit and vegetable needs here for not only the people that live under my roof, but some of my family. So this is a real threat to how we live. So and it's more of you grow more of your own. It will be also a threat to you the way you live too. So it really is very important. It needs to be high on our priority list this coming spring. So read up, go and visit those links when you get an opportunity, and familiarise yourself, brush over them before we head into spring, and be forearmed so that you can get on top of it before it starts. So with that again, look, if there's any other questions, please, you can unmute yourself rather than sitting there typing. I mean, I've been typing all day, so I'd rather not have to do that. So please unmute yourself, ask the question, and we'll get it answered.
Hi, I have a question. I have a landlord next door that's not at his property all the time. He has fruit trees that are really infected with Queensland Fruit Fly every year, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to reach him. He doesn't really seem interested in maintaining his fruit trees. He kind of just lets them go. And I know there's other dedicated fruit growers in the area. I'm only in a small area in Bayside. Some of my neighbours grow fruit trees as well. I have quite a few, and I'm just worried. I'm not really sure how to approach it. I've called Bayside, they're not interested. I've called environmental, they're not interested.
Okay,
Yeah,
my first thought there is that he's your they're your landlord. So
Not my landlord's next door's. He's a landlord.
yeah, so is it your landlord that lives next door?
No, he's not my landlord.
Not, I was going to say you don't want to piss off your landlord.
No.
There's
He's
a bigger
landlord.
We don't want to create a bigger problem than what we start with.
No, if it was on my property, I would obviously look after it, but
yes, but if it was your landlord that lived next door and they were his trees, you're looking after yours, and then he's just to keep infesting you. You don't want to necessarily go and tell him he's got to do better, or he might tell you to vacate the house. That's what I didn't want to ever see happen. It's called peer group pressure.
Okay.
You got to work with who wants to work with you and create that groundswell between you and the neighbours that want to work with you. And then collectively from that, you'll be able to demonstrate that fruit fly can be controlled with the netting and the traps, and even some baiting as well. And then by the time you get a few people working with you, I feel that safety in numbers, you'll be able to do letterbox stops, door knocking, even offer to help manage the tree if you can afford to do that. That's about the only positive way forward. With regards to your council, I do believe there in a standard set of council laws that there is actually called amenity laws. So if the keeping of the trees is not keeping in the amenity of the area, the council does have a little bit of grounds to move.
Okay.
All my other solutions I probably can't say on air.
They
No,
told
don't.
the council
Do
told
not.
his trees and said that there's nothing they can do because it's his property, but
Yeah,
is right on my fence line.
yeah.
So infected fruit is falling from his place to mine. And I called
It's
so many places last year, and just
it's
everyone just said not our problem.
it's so hard. It's so hard to even prove that there's Queensland fruit fly in the fallen fruit on his side of the fence because no one can go in there. We can't even get in there. You can't get in there to prove that it's Queensland fruit fly. So
Well, I took
unfortunately,
photos of the infected fruit that fell onto my side, and the larvae or the maggots. They look
highly likely, yeah.
highly likely.
So in this particular case, I think you are going to have to invest in the netting. It would not hurt to um, be able to prune if you are allowed to um, the fruit that's falling over to your side, but it's not going to make a hell of a difference if he's still got fruit fly over there. Yeah, so netting and that positive reinforcement once you get more of a groundswell of action from your neighbours, and together you can pressure this guy to take some action, I think.
Well, he doesn't really listen to anyone because he's a landlord, and he's not renting it out at the moment. It's been sitting vacant for about a year and a half now.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you write a letter to the Bayside City Council or whatever they are?
I've already called them. I've sent them emails. I've sent them photos of the affected fruit and the larvae. I've sent it to, I think it was some researchers that and city health, and like I've sent it to so many people, and they just said not our problem.
Uh, that's so sad. I'm sorry I can't give you any more structural advice there,
That's
or
okay.
constructive advice, sorry.
That's
But netting and looking after your own backyard, that you will get a good crop underneath a well constructed and maintained net.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's a bit of
It
a shame when people take that attitude, unfortunately. But
it shows that it happens, and it shows how really bad this problem's going to get, because there's
yeah,
always going to be that element in any society, whether it's residential backyards or commercial growers even.
yeah. Look, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's sad when people adopt that sort of attitude. But anyway, that's how it is, unfortunately. So then you've got to step up your response, unfortunately, and go down the path of extensive netting and making sure that you secure those nets as best you can. Make sure your timing's up to scratch. Again, familiarise yourself with all the things that we've discussed tonight.
And
With
I don't recommend approaching someone on your own. I
no, don't
do
do that.
think it's much safer to work in a group,
Yep.
work with the positive people, and yeah, after that, it's a bonus.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Any more questions that we can help with, please, by all means, unmute yourself and ask away. But if not, rather than hold you up for any longer, we'll bring this meeting to a close. Again, I truly and sincerely thank you very much, Bron, for putting this on tonight. It was fantastic, and it's going to be a great resource for us to be able to use this as we navigate in the future. And again, thanks for all the hard work that you put in. I mean, it's sad to see the funding has dropped out of this. I just can't believe that they've done that. But anyway, that's the way of the land, unfortunately.
My legacies lie with you, Craig.
Yeah, well, I'm
Thank you
not
for
sure
all that
about
you
that, but
do
look, I
too
mean,
for
we'll
community and
certainly keep.
gardening.
Sorry.
Thank you for all that you do for community and gardening, and you're sharing your thoughts. You do so very affordably and generously, and I really do back your pruning techniques and your gardening philosophy. And I think with that good management in the background, we can certainly do this and beat fruit fly.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's another thing that we haven't touched on tonight. Noel moved down this path, and Bron's going to look into it herself, but looking after soil and getting it back to functioning and raising the health of the plants through good functioning soil and not feeding plants may well offer some further protection from pest attack like fruit fly. It already is doing that in other instances like aphids and thrip and cabbage white butterfly and harlequin bug attack and so forth. So it's about fruit trees are a little harder to get the Brix levels raised in the leaf tests, but if you can get them there, get them above 12 Brix, there's a very good chance that may well be the death knell for fruit fly coming to go near your fruit trees. However, that remains to be seen just yet, but that's a works in progress. So stay tuned.
In the meantime,
Anyway,
pruning, planning, and netting.
that's it. All right. Well, all the best. Thanks again, Bron, and
Good
I'll
night.
catch up with you soon, no doubt, on the road. So, and all the best for the future. Bye for now. Bye, everyone. Thanks again.